will send a private chat to each of the speakers at 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and then I'll do a little twinkle sound. Hold on, let me bring that up. Something like that at 1 minute if it's necessary. And on that note, I'll let you get going, Joe.
Okay. Can everybody see the slides I'm pushing right now? Good?
Yep.
Okay. So, yeah, I'd like to kick off tonight with talking about my project here for Penn State. My capstone project is migrating a geographic information system to the cloud-based environment. And I'll get into some of the definitions here in a little bit, because as it's transitioning what we consider in the Department of Defense a non-program of record GIS to the cloud, and there's an environment that I'll also define. As I said, Joseph Saruk, that's me. My advisor is Ryan Baxter, and then the emblem I have on the right side there is just to kind of help folks. That's the organization I work with. So as I go through the project here, you'll hear me talk about Topo Joe or Topo Joe Portal or Army, but that's who I work with within the Army. I'm not sure if we got anybody else here in the Army tonight in the virtual audience. So for the agenda tonight, I'm going to talk through these topics, kind of touch on the problem statement, my timeline, hit some of the definitions, where we're at currently with our portal, ArcGIS portal, and the environment itself. What I see is for a needs assessment for why I need to push this portal to the cloud, and then some key points, design methodology, and looking at why I chose a certain design methodology, some of the goals and results, and then open it up at the tail end for some question and answers. So for problem statement, so and I'll hit the definitions on the next slide, but so the statement up front is, you know, the Army, Department of Defense is going to transition program of record GIS systems that we have in our inventory, but they're likely to do that in fiscal year 2023 or 2024, somewhere in that time frame. The gap results with the non-program of record GIS systems that we have in our inventory that we assumed risk for purchasing that are not going to be migrated to the cloud environment unless we build a business case now and then push that in front of senior management and so forth for their endorsement. So the project scope, I'm looking at doing this for the environment, and the environment consists of ArcGIS portal, another program. It's very similar to the GXP Explorer, but there's a program called the iStore. It's kind of a watered down version of the GXP Explorer. And then the Skyline GeoGlobe, moving that all to classified cloud infrastructure. Just touch on the classified piece. So that brings us to the different impact levels within a cloud-based environment. And just within the Department of Defense, it's just secret level. So not top secret or unclassified, but secret. The timeline for this project, so looking to present this capstone project, late April 2020. And presented to my peers in the Army, geospatial community, and looking to do it at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is kind of smack dab in the middle of Missouri. So some of the definitions, the detachment emblem that we talked about just in the very beginning. So it's think of the detachment as like an organization where you have roughly, I've got 32 folks there. We're looking primarily at foundational geospatial data production for the Army and the Special Forces community. And then some of the other big ones I'll talk about is the Defense Common Ground System Army. Occasionally I might slip with the acronym where I might say DCIGS. That's just what I'm referring to. So if you do hear me say that, that's just the big Army program of record. So a program of record, it's important to touch on that because I'm going to mention it throughout here. is it's a program that's been vetted through the DoD acquisition process, and that the Army will sustain. They say, hey, we endorse that. We'll sustain that for 10 plus years. Give you funding. We'll do the life cycle. We'll do the patches and so forth over time. A non-programmer record, think of it as like a bottom-up message where we say, hey, Army, that's great. You gave us a program. The licenses might be a little dated. We want to get the more current version. We're going to go ahead and purchase this system. We know that you're not going to sustain it, and it's on us to sustain. That's what we consider a non-programmer record. One of the other big points I'll touch on at the tail end or throughout this brief is what we consider capability drop to CD, or I'll sometimes call it CD2. This is where the DCIT, the Defense Common Ground System, Army is looking to release this capability to the Army, but put it into the cloud-based infrastructure. And this is where the gap results that we touched on earlier. Then just some other notes to hit here is within the Army, data discoverability and sharing across multiple classified networks is a current trend. Everybody's trying to solve it. Everybody's trying to figure out how to prevent silos of data. And the other piece for other folks in the cloud within my community, so far only one other large organization within the Army has achieved getting a system in the cloud, not a ARC portal, iStore, or GeoGlobe, but a system in a cloud-based architecture that it's considered the HINSCOM Cloud Initiative. But we're the first, though, within our organization to ask for classified cloud infrastructure within the Special Forces community. So this is where we're at currently. So you might also want to emphasize TopoJo portal. What that means is we put that name for our ArcGIS portal that we have on that you can see here with just a simple screenshot. And some of the tabs at the bottom there, it gives any user who hits our URL the ability to also hit the iStore or hit our Skyline GeoGlobe. Then our ARC portal consists of about 27 extensions, 7 servers, and we have the ability to have up to 2,200 users. Right now, we're still gaining that population, that user base, but we're up to about 105. And then with our iStore, we have a more mature user base. It's been active for about 4 years now. We've got 226 folks there. I understand most folks aren't going to be able to read some of the small text on this slide, but this is a deeper dive into our ArcGIS portal and the servers that we have. And this is one of the major components, the foundation of what we want to move to cloud-based infrastructure and build that business case around so that I can get the senior management endorsement. So as you can see, if you can see it, if you can't, no worries. Got a hosting server, image server, geoprocessor, GeoEvent, GeoAnalytics, and the GeoEvent and analytics together make the spatial temporal. And we have our SQL server as well. So from a needs assessment, so as I defined the environment with the iStore, the Arc Enterprise, and the Globe, the intent is to migrate these 3 non-programmer record systems to the classified cloud infrastructure. With that, in order to, and then also maintain that user base, that culture of reaching to the cloud, some of the things that we'll benefit from, the defense, the D6A platform, the Intelligence Processing Center, their strategy of releasing this, what they consider the IPC, it provides that interim cloud. It's not a cloud at a remote data center. It's a cloud. It almost allows the user to feel like it's a cloud at a headquarters building. So at like the but not at a remote data center. But just by doing that, it changes the culture within an organization to where they reach to a remote processing center, not quite a data center, a cloud, with a remote data center, but it still changes that culture. We're going to benefit from that, and that's where we're at currently with that. The third bullet down there, just with CD2, we, as I mentioned before, so that capability drop 2 of migrating those programmer records, they're not going to migrate these 3 non-programmer records here to the cloud. So our goal is to have that and build that mature user base by 2023, 2024. And some folks might be asking, with that second bullet from the bottom, just with the software version currency lagging by about 5-6 years. So we are provided a ARC portal license from the programmer record. However, it's at that 10.0 version, where currently we're at 10.7 with the non-programmer record. So that's where we needed that more agile system, but when we did that and we assumed that risk, we now have to, do our own business case in order to get it to the cloud. Some key points that need to consider as I move through this project. The CD2, it's not 100% defined in specificity. In that we know it's going to the cloud-based infrastructure, but that means there's a lot of nuances to that. The vendor is not defined, the scope of it, the processing power, there's a lot of specificity that needs to be defined yet, but the big picture is going there, and we need to mimic now. And as it gets more defined over time, we can better refine our business case as well. A nuance also with programmer records is where I mentioned our hardware will be required to be turned in the out years, in about 4 to 5 years from now. In that, as the cloud-based infrastructure stood up, the hardware that we have through the programmer records will be required to be turned back in for just being good stewards of Army equipment, DoD, etc. And then with that, though, that's where we currently have our software that we purchased out of pocket, and now we would no longer have that hardware. So it's a risk that we're cognizant of, and that's another driving factor as to why we need to get it to the cloud-based infrastructure. From our strategic planning process, just about the fourth bullet down, the cycles of that. So this year they're looking at fiscal year 2022. Next year it'll be 2023. So this year is really our ideal year to build that mature user base, so that bottom-up message is in support of migration. And then as we come into next year's cycle, it's an easy sell in front of the senior management, and we gain endorsement. Yeah. So looking at from a design methodology now as to how I'm going to get after building the business case as for determining what's needed within the cloud-based infrastructure. Really have 2 options to look at. I could either take a sequential approach, waterfall style, or iterative, the agile methodology. So my initial plan on this as I build out this business case over the coming months is to follow the waterfall design methodology to help feed the information needed for my organization's strategic planning process. The results are easy to understand. they're well documented, and it's easy for me to feed that to senior management as needed. I do plan to use the agile methodology over time, in that as we push, as technology is going to continue to advance, so new capabilities will come online, but I want to release those capabilities in a methodic manner and follow the methodology, being the agile methodology, to maintain those close ties with the user base. As I look at the design process here, don't want to talk every point on here. I want to touch on about 4 key points with the design process that I think are important to discuss tonight. So the second one down, as I work through this process, I really want to get the requirement, a good situational assessment, and a good requirements evaluation for what we need and what I need to push to the cloud-based infrastructure. And then at about the 5th one down, the cost-benefit evaluation and financial analysis. This is going to be a selling point within my organization, where folks are going to ask, hey, why do I need this versus this other system? Where are we going to get the money? And what will this get me in the long run? And then about 2 up from the bottom, looking at the detailed specifications and design. Going to continue to refine it, and hopefully towards the tail end, a really well detailed design and spec for what we need in fiscal year 2023-24. And then getting that approval and allocating those resources to us so that we can execute that purchase. Because right now I foresee that cost to be upwards of probably a little over, right in the hundreds of thousands, in order to get this done. So some of the goals that I want to achieve through getting this to the cloud infrastructure, hopefully some of it's tied to just getting it there, some of it's to educating other folks within our community. But it's if I get it to the cloud, I can get past some of the port security, and then I can better federate our ARC portal and better federate our other systems, make our data more discoverable across the enterprise. Through this project, I'll also have a sustainable solution for the long-term use of the platform. And then as this business case gets refined, it's a solution that I could share across my Army community of interest, so that other folks that are going to become curious as to how to get their non-programmer records to the cloud-based environment, how to get it done, how to build their business case, because nobody has really taken that interest yet within my community. And then hopefully I can mitigate some of the vulnerability concerns by using some of this cybersecurity concerns by applying some of the practices as well. And hopefully at the tail end as well, I have a real good business case with a dollar figure and a funding methodology, and that our financial folks that we call comptrollers can fund this cloud instance for us. So as mentioned, aligned with those goals, I'm hoping to have many federated, or more than a handful of federated ARC enterprises, both inside and outside of our network domain, in the domain. That's the SOCOM, the Special Ops Command. Want to have a shareable cloud migration strategy that I can share across the Army community. Want to, right now I have some really good use cases for some of our unclassified ARC portal, and some of the spatial folks that or some of our senior management are looking to do with these spatial, with our systems. And then really a good solid financial solution for sustaining the Topo Joe portal TJP through 2024. And then a good security protocol configuration that's easy to share, and that I could share as a best practice with other folks So as they stand up that cloud-based environment, they know kind of what the cybersecurity folks are concerned about and what they're not concerned about, and share that as a best practice. Some of the known limiting factors that I have to work through just being within DoD is the regulatory guidelines that are published. The Cloud Computing Security Reference Guide gives some good guidance as to what that can be done and what can't be done. The impact level 6, as I mentioned before, so a lot of our ArcGIS online stuff is below any impact level. But as we step up into different classification levels, 2, 4, and 5, they're all at the unclassified level, where 3 and 4 were merged together to be just 4. And then what I need is impact level 6, which is just a classified network. The industry capability right now, what's available to us right now is Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure. Those are the 2 big ones. And then for some of the SOPs or standard provisioning procedures are it's a limiting factor in that our network and cybersecurity folks are really lacking the knowledge. If I were to approach them and say, hey, how do I acquire a cloud and meet some of your requirements, where they see it as almost an experiment and they're like, well, right now we don't have any procedures or regulations that you need to also follow. So it's learning for them at our level, but there's as I mentioned up top there, that Cloud Computing Security Reference Guide will really, that's our broad guidelines. So some closing thoughts, so everything I discussed there. So what I'd like people to walk away with is the migration of 3 geographic information system platforms to an impact level 6 cloud infrastructure that I'm working within the constraints of government policies and procedures. It's building that business case and enabling the organization to get past that inflection point of, hey, how do I get stuff to the cloud? Why can't you just do it here at the fixed site? Got to get them to think that, or to be all in on cloud computing. And then it's helping others within my community understand the potential of cloud computing, and within the Army geospatial community, that to be able to easily move their systems to the cloud as well down the road. So yeah, that's, if everybody walks away with that for tonight, for what I discussed in the subsequent slides, I hope that helps define this project for everyone. These are some of the references that I used to help shape these thoughts. Pending any questions, that's what I have for tonight.
Any questions? Either use your mic to ask questions or put it in the chat window. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think I see a question there from Peter. Just how am I planning to use thinking about GIS as a reference? So with that, that book there was good from a management perspective. They had some good methodologies in there as well, and how to nest with some of the strategic planning processes and getting folks to support geographic information systems within an organization from a management perspective. That's really how I plan to utilize that book as a reference, just to kind of help nest my thoughts from a management perspective. Yeah, so for lower level user support, so the plan there, Jasmine, I have so some of the folks that I have in my team is we go out, we call it mobile training teams, and we try to get to organizations and educate them on the capability that's at their fingertips, show them, and show folks that not just within the GeoIN or geospatial community, but also outside that. And then at the lower echelons to help show that what's possible and then give them accounts and let them kind of teach themselves and then reach to us as they need help. And then hopefully that over time builds that lower level user support. So a case example to start with. So one of it's on our unclassified side that really garnered, we call it dashboard, medical dashboard, but it garnered a lot of senior management support in that it's using our ARC portal or our ArcGIS online, but it blossomed into an ARC portal on the unclassified side. But it's really our senior management just wanting a way to visualize data as to where troops are on the battlefield as they get medevaced back to the States, but using a way outside of some of the bureaucratic systems and an easy way for somebody to see it on their phone where a person is. And with that, though, we're going to apply it to an organization that has folks around the globe, and in theory, our commanding general will have visibility on 100 plus folks that are medevac at any given time, and be able to see where they are over time. And that's really one of our big use cases where folks got away from like the terrain analysis, imagery analysis, but they see how things happen in space and time, and using some of our capabilities to help them visualize, which then results in us having that ARC portal capability to get at some of our more foundational tasks from an imagery analysis or geospatial analysis perspective.
Thanks, Joe. You have another question there. Joe, can you still hear us? I think you have one last question.
Yeah, well, I thought I was unmuted there, but yeah, for Trey, it's the institutional knowledge base of using cloud computing is what needs to happen at the Army geospatial from an instructional perspective, getting comfortable using the cloud-based tools or the cloud computing potential. You need to get folks comfortable using services, software as a service, infrastructure, platform as a service. And right now, that's just not there.
I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And we look forward to seeing your results when you get them. Yes, having that, it sounds like, going back to my question with the case example, it sounds like you have a really great case example there to bring people on board, which makes it easier to sell a lot of these services and things. So that's great. Our next presenter is Kimberly. If you can start loading your presentation, and I will re-put the schedule on. And don't forget, and I'll put on the, while we're waiting for Kimberly to load, great. Don't forget to provide feedback. I've put the link into the chat window, so please make sure you give feedback to each of the presenters so that they can improve their talks or just know how they've done. Kimberly, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Hi there. How's sound working?
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay. So my project, I'm looking at viewshed analysis and looking at how terrain and DEM resolution will affect what's visible and what's not. I worked with Pat Kennelly this semester. And quick overview. So on the right side there, there's our visibility box. Green area is visible with a greenish blue not visible area. And then we'll have an observing point in the center. And so this is a 1 meter. I want to look at the 1, 10, 30, and 90 meter resolutions just to see what we're looking at and looking for differences. But I'll go into details in a couple slides. So we're going to start with background, looking at the viewshed analysis. What is it? Why I'm interested in the resolution, and some of the challenges of trying to get terrains grouped in the United States. The study requirements, I'm going to talk about the objectives that I'm hoping to accomplish and how we pick ideal study environments, because I'm hoping to get a couple different terrain types across the United States. And then I'm going to talk about the parameters that are going to go into the viewshed, the workflow, and then I'm going to wrap up with a little pilot area that we did in Colorado and a timeline. So on the right here, we have 4 different viewsheds. And typically, they're looking for what's visible and what is not visible. And like most of them, I'm also going to use the bare earth DEMs to get rid of vegetation, buildings, and other noise. Mine's going to vary a little bit, and instead of looking for that ideal placement where you'd want to put the tower or the scenic building or something like that, I'm actually going to place my points, just evenly space them, see where they land, and see what they can see. So the purple and blue ones on the bottom actually aren't as visible, or sorry, they're a lower elevation than the green and the red on top, which we'll be able to see that in a couple of slides a little easier. So all 4 of these pictures are taken at 1 to 3000 resolution. And one of the major things that they said will affect how good the quality of your viewshed analysis is what kind of DEMs you're putting in it. So I'm expecting like the 90 down there. It's very coarse, big tiles. It's probably going to show a lot more areas as visible or not visible than, say, the 1 or the 10. That's what I'm expecting to see. Then we have to figure out what kind of terrains we're going to look at. So Hammond has his map on the left there. He has 8 groups that he was able to come up with. He was looking at the problem of how do I take a small scale map of the United States and provide enough detail without oversimplifying it. So originally he tried to use 7 parameters to try and create a map. And he realized that he had over 1,000 different combinations and it was too complex. So he had to simplify it further. So ultimately he came out with 3 classes: local relief, flatness, and profile. And that's what generated these 8 categories to kind of show the United States. And so I'm going to further generalize these into mountains, plains, and hills, because I won't be able to test all the different groups, but I think this accurately captures many of them. And then we had additional research. So this study, I believe they took Hammond's and they further expanded upon it. And ultimately, I think this is more looking at more localized areas, and it's more complex than I can use. So I decided to go back and use Hammond's. My objectives, I was looking to understand the effects of a DEM's resolution on the viewshed analysis. I want to see how the visibility change will change just based on the DEM's resolution. So will that 1 meter resolution reveal different pockets of visibility or invisibility than my 10, my 30, and my 90? And for patterns of visibility and invisibility, will there be a consistency that we'll see across terrain types? So will higher resolutions DEMs, the visibility, will that change or remain constant across all the terrains? So the USGS national map is the background picture for this, and this is the available 1 meter data for the United States. And it's kind of selective. And then if you would zoom in further in any of these areas, it would be a little more selective yet to get them together. And so pretty much we're going to pick our areas based on the 1 meter. Because the 10, the 30, and the 90, they were continuous, where the 1 meter is our deciding factor. We also want to test several terrains to look for patterns. So we're looking for several regions within the United States to capture consistencies and patterns. So we want to look at the Appalachian and the Rocky Mountains to fully capture a mountain. For the viewshed parameters, we have our 4 observee points here. So we have 4 different viewsheds. And each of them can see 360 degrees. The distance to the outer circle, we're assuming that the furthest that they can see in any direction is 5 kilometers. And we evenly space them so that way there's no overlap within a 30 by 30 kilometer study area. And we used a stratified sampling. So this is that area in Colorado. And this time we have it 3D so that way you can see the lower areas and the higher areas. The highest areas are in white, and the lower areas are the valleys there in a more brown color. The areas will be grouped into different terrain types. So I'm going to look at my flat, hill, and mountainous areas. And we're going to see when we zoom in, so for Colorado, there were a lot of areas that there were holes. So when I zoomed in, the cells or the tiles just weren't up against each other. So I had to pick areas that they were consistently lined up, so that way I wasn't missing elevation data in those areas. So that's one of the biggest factors for picking my 1 meter data locations for the study. And I'm going to collect a bunch of different sample points for each of them and then run the viewsheds. The 4 points then will be evenly spaced. So in the last slide there, they don't overlap and they don't go off the edges of the DEM. And that's what decided that I needed a 30 by 30 study area. One of the products I'm hoping to produce is a profile. It's a little elevation chart down on the right-hand corner there. So from the edge of the yellow arrow to the purple point, observer point in the middle, it's how the terrain changes. And it can help us look to explain why the visibility or invisibility is happening. So I won't go into too much detail on the workflow, but my data is coming from USGS for everything except for the 90. The 90 is coming from CGIAR, CSI, and that is going to be STRM data. So it'll be a little bit different. And then it's going to go through a quality check where I'm going to make sure that there's no funky looking elevation numbers in there. And then it'll go through a pre-processing to put all the different tiles together and shape it to the 30 by 30 box that I need it to before I run the viewshed. And then from there, I can look at the visibility analyze the results, and collect data. One of the things I'm doing for work, I work for the Army, and we wanted to look at our observee standing versus laying down. So when I ran that for Colorado, it's pretty consistent. So for my capstone, I'm going to focus on standing. But I thought it would be neat to include for comparison. So now we're going to flip into the results of that pilot study. So each of the 4 points has its own unique color. We're going to start just by going through all points at their different resolution. And then I'm just going to kind of quickly flip back and forth between them so you can see the general differences. And then I have an intersect that'll show all the areas that they have in common and really show the details that they have in common at 1 meter for all point 1, point 2, point 3, and point 4. So for 1 meter versus 10, there's a couple changes, especially on the point 1, and then 10 to 30, and then 90 to 30, there's a lot of changes. So now we ran an intersect, and what that did was it looked at what all the resolutions have in common. So it's in that blue area where it's the same on the 1, the 10, the 30, and the 90. And we're going to go through those. So for point 1, we can see the 90 had a lot of extra area, and there's quite a few areas of change between the 1 and the 10, and then quite a bit different between the 1 and the 30 as well. So we'll do a deep dive in and kind of look at why these changes are happening. And is it a gain or a loss? And there's point 3 and point 4. So for my timeline, I'm going to use December to kind of pick, this is definitely the 3 terrain types I'm going to use, how many sample locations am I going to run, and I'm going to use January to download all the data and visually check it and start to put them together. And I'm hoping to have them all put together by the end of January. So that way I can create the view sheds in February and still have part of February to analyze the results and compile them all before I present. And that is what I have. Any questions? So for the DEM sources, I'm using USGS for the 1, the 10, the 30, and just a different one for the 90. because they didn't have 90 available. I haven't checked the local levels or the regional. So some of the studies that I was reading, they're saying that it can be everything from how the imagery is processed to the cell size. And so that was one of the main things I really wanted to make sure I got as much of my data from the same place as I could, just to try and rule out any of those differences in how the DEMs are put together.
Does anyone have any other questions? I have another question for you. Out of curiosity, how did you, so you said in your example of someone standing up and lying down, how did you assess what the height would be from the ground up when you were looking at that for your view shed?
So typically when my organization runs the view sheds, we use 0.5 meters for laying down and then 1.7 meters for standing up.
Any final questions? I think that's it. Sorry for the confusion between the two Kims at the start here. You guys are both back to back. I should have highlighted with the different last names, so I apologize for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kim 1 for your great presentation, and we look forward to seeing your final results. Do you, oh, one last question. Do you have any ideas where you might be presenting, or have you not thought of that?
I'm hoping to present the beginning of April, the mountain cartography workshop.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, thank you. Okay, on to our next presenter, Kimberly 2. Sorry for the heart attack there, but if you could slowly get your slides up and running, that'd be great. So we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's fine. So if you, whenever you're ready, Kimberly, please go ahead.
Alrighty. All right, so good evening. My name is Kimberly Godwin, and my academic advisor is Dr. Todd Bakastow. So my capstone project is Surveilling Revolution, the Implications of Hong Kong on Xinjiang. This picture that I'm using in the background isn't actually China. This is a London police control room using a similar setup, which is using CCTV cameras in the city and correlating them to geographic points on the map and monitoring people's faces. So please take a moment to review my agenda. Depicted on this slide is a security checkpoint in a Uyghur marketplace in Xinjiang province, China. I'll be briefly discussing the historical context of China's use of geospatial technologies against their population before I describe my research processes. In 2009, an act of violence by ethnically Han Chinese factory workers against Uyghur workers in Urumqi was uploaded to the internet. The Uyghur community was outraged and began to protest. Quickly, the protests turned violent against the Han community. This incident was one of many that the Chinese Communist Party is using to justify their stringent controls on the Uyghur population of Xinjiang province. And instead of addressing the concerns of the Uyghurs, the CCP has enacted a robust strike hard campaign in their war on terror against their ethnic minorities. They are specifically using a mix of modern technologies to surveil and control their population. These technologies have since been packaged for sale to the global community. We are in a modern age of technology. We are more connected to the global community than ever before. Our technology is learning through complex algorithms, our daily routines to simplify our lives. It asks us to share our opinion of a restaurant based on where our GPS pin is. We can share our running routes live from our watches for fitness accountability. UNICEF defines geospatial technologies as technologies that are used to acquire, manipulate, store, and visualize geographic information for the purpose of providing a connection to where individuals, groups, and infrastructure are located in time and space. These technologies are inherently surveillance technologies, and no country is more blatant in their use of geospatial technologies to this purpose than China. Following the attacks of September 11th, China rebranded its fight against separatism as a counterterrorism strategy, their own war on terror. They identified 3 evils that their Strike Hard campaign would fight: terrorism, religious extremism, and separatism. Strike Hard was then targeted towards the groups and ideals that threatened the stability of the CCP's rule, better known as the 5 poisons, which are Uyghurs, Tibetans, followers of Falun Gong, the Chinese pro-democracy movement, and the Taiwan independence movement. The CCP is using a mix of technologies to monitor these groups, things that range from forcing Uyghurs to place GPS units in their cars, installing tracking applications on phones of Uyghurs and tourists, to using facial recognition technology integrated with robust networks of CCTV cameras that live query databases with identification numbers, known assets, family members, and previous locations. In February 2019, the Federal Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill, better known as the extradition bill, was introduced in Hong Kong. This bill would enable the CCP to legally arrest and extradite political dissenters to mainland China for prosecution. It was published in March and then first read in April, which led to a series of protests and rallies. A protest on June 9th saw the first use of artificial intelligence to count and later identify 517,478 protesters. Since June, the protests have escalated. Pro-democracy protesters have torn down smart lampposts with security cameras on top. They are wearing masks and using umbrellas to defeat facial recognition technology. As protesters that are identified have been isolated, attacked, and were arrested. Much of these technologies were refined in Xinjiang province. The Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, or just Xinjiang, is located in the northwestern portion of China that borders 8 countries. It is edged with mountains and full of deserts. To understand just how remote this region really is, the People's Liberation Army uses one area of Xinjiang to test its nuclear weapons. This region has been long considered vital to Chinese regime control since the Qing dynasty. It was once home to the Silk Road, which followed a path through the desert, with pockets of civilizations thriving near the oasis. Xinjiang is also responsible for 1/3 of China's cotton production, has rich oil and gas reserves, and is of economic importance to China's more modern Belt and Road Initiative. But this province has not always been under Chinese control and was once its own nation. It became a Chinese territory during the Qing dynasty, which the native people of the region, Uyghurs, struggled against for years. There were a series of independence attempts that were ultimately defeated. By the 1940s, the Chinese government was at war with itself. The ruling Kuomintang, or KMT, was fighting for control against the Chinese Communist Party. In 1944, a Soviet-backed rebellion in Ely Valley led to the formation of the Second East Turkestan Republic. This period of independence ended in 1949 after the CCP drove the KMT into exile in Taiwan. The Soviets facilitated surrender talks between the tribal leaders of East Turkestan and the CCP, which ultimately ended when the plane carrying the tribal leaders crashed, killing all on board. Uyghurs are an ethnically Turkic people that practice a form of Sufi Islam with an estimated world population of only 13 million, 11 million of which reside in Xinjiang province. They are only about 49% of the population of Xinjiang province, with the majority being Han Chinese that were relocated there. Their cultural manner of dress, grooming, language, and Western appearance makes them visually different from the Han ethnic majority. Which leads into my research question. How is the CCP using geospatial technologies to surveil and control the Uyghurs in Xinjiang? This question will be addressed by examining geospatial surveillance technologies implemented against the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. There is a strong parallel to the struggles in Hong Kong to Xinjiang, but it affords more access due to unique considerations that Hong Kong is provided as a former British colony. So this is a political map of China. It depicts all of the different sub-classifications of the different areas. Xinjiang province is technically an autonomous region, which is supposed to provide the ethnic minorities more considerations underneath the law, such as Uyghurs in Xinjiang were allowed an exception to the old one-child rule, where China only allowed its citizens to have one child per family. Uyghurs were allowed to have 4 to 6 because they were an ethnic minority. And this status also affords them more government support programs, financial and medical subsidies. And it's led by an appointed ethnic governor to oversee the region. In Hong Kong, which is at the bottom south, if you can see my cursor, the bottom southeast across the strait from Taiwan, is a special administrative region, which it became in 1997 when the British turned over the colony to China, and they're still protected underneath some basic laws implemented by the British government. So they're afforded more personal freedoms, and they retain their unique cultural identity from mainland Chinese. So my study is a qualitative analysis of the CCP's counterterrorism strategy, their use of technologies for internal security, an examination of the actions of the Hong Kong protesters, and then the CCP's responses to those protest actions. This study is an examination of historic and current events, which affords a certain level of repetition in sources used, the terminology, and an understanding of cultural nuances that might be lost in translation. I actually have access to, I don't speak Chinese, but I have access to people that do, that can help me with this portion of my project. Since the events and the understanding of technologies are ongoing, more information is being released in the form of technological white papers. And there's also the capacity to cross-reference different perceptions of events through social media and mainstream reporting to determine a broader truth. So to understand how and why this is all happening, I will be developing a historical context for the actions and reactions of the Hong Kong protesters and the CCP. I'm going to establish the current sequence of events, answer the who, what, when, wheres, and whys, and then work backwards to establish a timeline for the events. So my workflow is more simply gathering, filtering, processing, and production, with gathering being the identification of possible sources, and this is an ongoing process. Filtering is the actual reading of my source materials, and then recognition of any sort of bias Processing is where I'm going to be validating my information with other sources and then compiling my notes. And production is the organization of materials into a more formal paper, which I hope to present as like a brown bag session to a group of my peers in the intelligence community. I have taken into consideration that this is a hot button topic right now with its coverage in the media. There is a wealth of heavily biased articles for and against the protests. There are news stories that portray false events and information on both sides, for and against. But I also must consider in the course of my research that not all of the websites that I come across haven't been tampered with or could be possibly contain malicious software. Pro-Hong Kong activists or supporters are being targeted and harassed online and in person. And some protesters are trying to remain anonymous to protect themselves and their families, and it would be important to avoid naming them for their safety as much as I can. Essentially, I need to protect myself and my systems by using good cybersecurity practices in the course of my research so I too don't become a subject of harassment or infect my computer with malicious software. This is an issue that really goes beyond Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Surveillance methods are evolving as counters to them are being found. Non-Chinese entities are facing censorship based on their views towards Hong Kong, such as the banning of certain Hollywood movies in China or the NBA. And these technologies are being sold globally and also integrated as peripheral software and other technologies such as phone filtering applications, laptops, or phones. Some of this technology is currently in use by the United States. US agencies are seeking similar technological solutions for public safety, such as investment into machine learning surveillance technologies to identify suspicious behaviors. We must be cognizant of how we balance our desire for safety versus our personal liberties. These technologies hold a high potential for abuse if misused. So that concludes my presentation. Any questions? And here are my references. So I am an intelligence specialist. So my area of responsibility is the Indo-Pacific theater. So I was introduced to the Uyghur problem back in 2009 when we were doing our country briefs in technical school. And I wasn't assigned China, but one of my friends was. And so during that time, we were also talking about closing down Guantanamo Bay, and then it was trying to come up with a solution to what to do with these Uyghurs that were arrested and detained there that got scooped up with Taliban fighters. And so there was all of that. So that's been kind of at the periphery of my entire career for the past 10 years. For my term paper for 871, I did a paper comparing the plight of the Uyghurs to the plight of the Apaches during the Indian Wars. So, and of course right now, with this being my area of responsibility, there's a lot of focus on what's going on in Hong Kong. So it's kind of like in my face all day and when I get home. Let's see. So the question is, do I model my approach from previous intel gathering projects? I'm kind of following the intelligence cycle, which has been kind of hammered into my brain. There's a lot of information out there, and it's just really digging through it. Like most of the articles I found refer to other articles that I've already read, or they refer to other sources. And there's certain things in translation that are kind of interesting that have been, so you notice a term being repeated over and over again, and then you can go, it's like, hey, maybe I should be using that. And so that's how I've been finding more and more information, because most of the articles talking about the geospatial technologies being used against as part of the Strike Hard campaign don't call it that. They are usually, they'll refer to it as something else. So it's like finding out what those keywords are that they're using. So let's see, concerning security issues, where do you plan to present your results? So I had discussed with Todd about presenting this at my work as like a brown bag lunch session where I could discuss it in a larger environment with people that may already actively be engaging in the issue. So I work at the Joint Intelligence Operations Center here in Pearl Harbor. So I'll probably be presenting my results next spring to a group of my peers in the intelligence community. So with verifying my data to ensure it's accurate, I have found that it's really hard to find things that are unbiased concerning like early days in like the East Turkestan movement. So I'm going to be doing a lot of cross secondary sourcing validation. So it'll be probably comparing events from both perspectives to find like a middle ground about agreement what happened. Like right now there's a lot of disagreement about how many protesters are at what location. And some things in social media are kind of like a ground truth. But I am seeing a lot of rhetoric phrasing things differently than how they are. So there'll probably be me reaching back and working with my native speakers to see if they can help me get a perspective, because living as a Uyghur or in Hong Kong is a much different perspective from us looking out. So but yeah, that's pretty much it. It's like a lot of cross-sourcing. Sometimes like an innocuous mention can lead to like a bigger article. Some stuff's also public record. Like I know that Lenovo laptops use the facial recognition software by MegV, which is called Face++, which is what China is using as their facial recognition technology for their security systems. They also gave a live demo to BBC Reporter earlier this year. So they provided him a live demonstration with some very limited access to one of their control centers. So they flagged him as a suspicious person, and then they sent him out into the wild of China, and then they found him in about 5 minutes to show how effective the technology was. So we had his camera footage of things going on.
Any other questions? I think everyone's stunned.
Hope that's a good thing. I was trying not to do death by PowerPoint. I can also explain the anime character. So Blizzard recently, which is a computer game company, recently punished a person that had won one of their game tournaments for pro-Hong Kong sentiments. So they suspended him from participation in further activities for almost 2 years, and they took back all of the prize money that they had given him. And the internet community kind of like lashed out, and so they decided to start drawing like Blizzard-owned intellectual property, such as that character from Overwatch, as Hong Kong protesters. They also dressed up as those characters and were protesting in Hong Kong in order to attempt to force Blizzard to backpedal a little bit. Because if Blizzard's intellectual properties are associated with pro-Hong Kong stances, it'll get Blizzard banned in China, much like how Winnie the Pooh is banned in China because people were using it as a meme on the internet to make fun of Xi Jinping. And since they started doing that, Blizzard did backpedal a little bit, and they reinstated the person they were punishing, and they gave back the prize money.
Wow. Is all I can say to that. Yeah, that's a interesting world. Do we have any other last questions? I think that's it. Thank you very much. You certainly have an interesting project and lots of challenges in there. Good luck. And we look forward to seeing your final results.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next presenter is Catherine Meckler. If you can load your presentation, that'd be great.
Alrighty.
Don't forget, while Catherine's loading her presentation, don't forget to provide feedback. I've put the link up. Great. Whenever you're ready, Catherine.
Alrighty. Before I start, I just want to say hello to everybody, but also I am getting over a cold, a little sickness. So I have some lozenges and I might cough a little bit, so just bear with me. I appreciate it. All right, so tonight I'll be talking to you about my MGIS capstone proposal project, which is public diplomacy and geovisual analytics, mapping panda diplomacy through space and time. And my advisor is Dr. Anthony Robinson. So overview, here's what we're going to go over. I'll spend some time talking about the background and motivation of this project. I'll spend a significant time talking about methodology, roll into some limitations, and end with the significance of this project and future work that this project will be able to support, and then talk about my project timeline and the resulting venue. I do have references. I don't really plan to go through them. So for background and motivation, in my title, you heard me talk about public diplomacy. Well, what is that? To understand public diplomacy, you also have to understand soft power. And soft power, basically, a government's international power comes in three main forms. It comes from its military power, its diplomatic power, and its soft power. It's really the ability to generate sympathy based on the attractiveness of one's national culture, values, and policies, and then the way that this soft power is carried out is through public diplomacy. Really, these concepts came into use during the Cold War era, especially when diplomacy was faltering, even failing at times, and nobody wanted to touch their military power lest they destroy the entire human population. So soft power and public diplomacy became very important for government to still enact its power on the international stage. Public diplomacy is and has developed into a way for a government to increase people's familiarity with its country, which then subsequently increases the people's appreciation for it. So this gets into why is it important to even study these things? Well, for one, as mentioned before, soft power is part of a government's international power strategy. So understanding a country's soft power and public diplomacy strategy can reveal a country's overall power intention. Academically, public diplomacy and soft power it's a burgeoning field. It's a burgeoning field with a lot of research occurring from the perspective of public relations specifically, and not so much using geospatial models. Even though it is suggested by a few of the authors that I researched that a combination of public diplomacy with other disciplines can create a breakthrough for research in public diplomacy. So I argue that geospatial exploration can be one of these other disciplines to help explore public diplomacy in new ways. So first of all, as said before, there is a lack of geospatial exploration within the public diplomacy research realm. It can provide these different insights if we look at it in the frame of reference of Tobler's first law. So as a review for everyone, Tobler's first law of geography states everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. With the perspective of public diplomacy in play, in space and time, we can begin to ask more complex questions by looking through this geospatial lens. So for instance, if, according to Tobler's first law, nearer countries are more related than farther countries, are they related enough to avoid becoming a public diplomacy target? Or thinking temporally with the proximity of international relations, if countries interact nearer in time, are they less susceptible to public diplomacy efforts since they are more related? And furthermore, can this temporal knowledge be used along with a spatial picture to predict a country's global or regional intentions? These are exactly the type of complex questions that a geospatial exploration of public diplomacy can ask and also help answer. So I keep using geospatial exploration, but really the model that will produce this exploration is geovisual analytics. Geovisual analytics is the why. It not only allows one to explore data to ask a why, but it also allows one to then explore the data further to answer it. It's comprised of geospatial data, which covers the where and the who, and attribute data, which compiles the what, the when, and the how, and all together in a geovisual analytical tool, they can all be interactively explored to answer and ask about, or to ask and answer that why question. It encourages unconventional thinking to discover new relationships. It explains existing hypotheses, and it also helps, especially to develop new hypotheses. Geovisual analytics is important in this situation because you don't need to come into using this tool with a predetermined hypothesis. You can use it to discover different relationships and different hypotheses. Geovisual analytics focuses on tangible analytical reasoning through the process of examining information in order to find patterns within that information, which is important in this situation because part of public diplomacy that makes it so difficult to have already mapped geospatially is that there's a lot of intangible resources behind it. Things like political stability, government effectiveness, cultural values, digital diplomacy, all of these are very intangible and don't have a physical representation in our world. Mapping it geovisually, geospatially, allows there to be a tangible frame of reference, similarly to the tangible analytic reasoning with which to explore these intangible resources. There are some shortfalls to using geovisual analytics, and these come in the form of meaningful skills. One tool fits all. So for meaningful skills, really not all geospatial data and not all data in general are best represented at similar scales. So when inputting certain data types into these geovisual analytic tools, some of them will be better represented at a different scale than others. Furthermore, for geovisual analytics, a lot of tools out there on the market approach it as a one-tool-fits-all situation, where it's the exploration, it's the explanation, it's also the presentation of all of this data, instead of purely existing as a tool that can function as an analytical and exploratory framework, especially important absent of that predetermined hypothesis. So to demonstrate how geovisual analytics can contribute further exploration of public diplomacy, I'll be using a case study to demonstrate this case, and that will be panda diplomacy. So for a little background of panda diplomacy, what is it? It's the act of China gifting or loaning giant pandas to other countries across the world. They've been doing it since the 7th century. It really took hold during the Cold War, and it progresses in different phases that reflect the international climate of that time and of China's own bilateral representation or bilateral relations with other countries. So why select this as a case study? Well, throughout the research that I read, there is this idea that panda diplomacy is an indicator of China's international stance. So if we think about the presence, the absence, the addition or subtraction of a panda at any time, this could be an indicator of China's interest, China's apathy, approval, or disapproval for a specific country or region at that time. So by using or given this focus of China's panda diplomacy as a possible indicator of its geopolitical interests, it's surprising to me that throughout the research, it really hasn't been mapped as frequently. Within the research, the only map that I found is the one that's presented on the screen. And while it does map it through space and time, it does so statically and pretty much just stays on a single topic. Furthermore, all the other research that centers on this idea of panda diplomacy as an indicator uses individual panda transactions as case studies. So the problem with both of these is that they're relatively small samples and relatively small example sizes to be making larger conclusions to panda diplomacy as a whole. But if we were able to dynamically explore these, dynamically explore panda diplomacy through full space and time, we'd be able to identify, explore broader relationships that can then lead to conclusions about panda diplomacy being that possible indicator for China's international stance. In this project, I also I also aim to explore a hypothesis that has to do with this broader relationships, and that's listed below. I'll paraphrase myself and say basically that my hypothesis is the distribution of giant pandas around the world and the world's reaction to it can predict China's future power intentions, as we discussed earlier. In order to explore this hypothesis and also explore panda diplomacy as a whole through this case study, I'll need a geovisual analytic tool. And the one that I selected to use is Esri's Insights for ArcGIS. So the reason why I selected this tool is that, first of all, it's geospatially focused. The whole point of this project is really to show how the discipline of geography can contribute to the discipline of public diplomacy, so it needs to be geospatially focused. It also needs to have the ability for data analytics as part of geovisual analytics. So for this reason, I explored a tool like Tableau. But Tableau's, while it does have a very robust data analytics portion, its geospatial portion is a second thought to the tool as a whole, so it was not geospatially focused, and I elected not to use the tool. Secondly, Esri's Insights for ArcGIS has many different visualization tools in one platform. To the right, you can see a whole bunch of those types of tools, and I'll go a little bit more in depth about some in a couple of slides. But I need this because there are many different data types that I will be exploring that we'll talk about in a next slide. So I needed a tool that had multiple tools, unlike data-specific tools. So we're talking about geovisual analytic tools that focus on importing, sifting through, and mapping, say, just tweets. While that would be helpful, it leaves out a lot of the other different data types I also need to explore visually. And furthermore, Insights was selected because I needed a tool that was created by an experienced GIS company. In these types of projects, there is always the option to create one's own system. However, as one of the articles that I read point out, Amar and Sasko, they said, adequate data representation and graphic design tools often fails to A, imperfect data collection, and B, inexperienced presentation design. For this project, I will be creating my own data sets. So I'm already accepting risk in an imperfect data collection. So I did not want to accept further risk in an inexperienced presentation design, because that's definitely where my knowledge lies for for geovisual analytic tools. So I needed it to be created by an experienced geovisual analytic company, and I needed it to be geospatially focused, and Esri certainly fits that bill. So as I've talked about, I need this tool to display many different data types. So we'll get into those different data types that I'll be looking at. Soft power, a lot goes into measuring soft power because it is such it has intangible resources attached to it. There are two components, the agent and the subject, with multiple parts underneath. I'll go into how it's generally mapped geovisually to measure it, and then I'll explain how I'm going to specifically map these data types. So the agent and the subject, the agent is the one doing the public diplomacy, and the subject is the one receiving the public diplomacy. So the agent in this case will be China. The first part, resources and objectives, basically states what do they have, what do they plan to do with it. If you look down at the orange boxes at the bottom, you can see that's accomplished in geovisualization by mapping foreign policy. So that's what I plan to do, mapping Chinese foreign policy per year for the years I select to use. Secondly, the second part is conversion. So basically, what are the outcomes, what are the outputs of their public diplomacy efforts? This can be mapping activities, mapping audiences. For my project, I will be mapping these singular panda diplomacy activities. So panda locations, what countries are requesting pandas, where pandas are removed from, the amount of pandas, the type of the transaction, so whether it was a gift, whether it was a loan, whether it was for conservation, etc. Finally, part of the agent is that target response. Really, who are they going after? And this is going to be mapping networks and partnerships, which is exactly what I'll be doing with the Chinese diplomacy, or the panda diplomacy, with who's within that panda diplomacy network, who is not within, who was once part of it and now isn't, and also the opposite. And finally, for the second component of soft power measurement, the subject, the part of the subject is basically how did they react? What's the outcome? And that is very much so based in perceptions and an emotional response. So that's going to be the most intangible data type, mapping sentiment and valence. Sentiment and valence, I like to explain it opposite. So valence and sentiment. Valence is basically how much publicity did this event get, and then the sentiment is what was the reaction to it? How did the public feel about this happening? How I'll be mapping that is through news reports. So I could have done this through something like tweets, but the timeline I plan to look at, which is from roughly the Cold War till present day, obviously Twitter hasn't always existed, and a lot of countries still don't have Twitter that maybe do have a giant panda. There are some transformation issues when considering creating these data sets and using them, and that really comes down to two: generalizing and oversimplifying the data, and ensuring I do complete research. So for instance, you could spend years mapping Chinese foreign policy per year. I will be generalizing and simplifying it. It will be an issue if oversimplification leads to different intentions than what the original foreign policy was. And for complete research, for an example, news reports, making sure that I'm getting as many news reports as I can. I don't think I'll ever be able to do complete research. There are some sites I won't either be able to read or access, but ensuring that I'm able to get as many news reports as possible to create a accurate picture of what that sentiment and valence was. Here is a presentation of all the different types of tools that come with Esri's Insights for ArcGIS tool that I can use to map all those different data types. So here you can see they're all represented through quantitative, qualitative, temporal data types. Some tools are used in more than one category to show that there's flexibility inherent within this tool. Instead of going into this in depth, basically the red boxes are tools that I think at this point in my project I'll end up using. However, that's always can always change once I get to actually using the tools with the data sets I build. Taking those red boxes and putting them as an example of the tools, we could see that these tools will allow me to fully analyze the Panda diplomacy data through space and time using the geovisual analytic tool. Some of them are purely spatial, some of them are purely temporal, but the combination of all of them and the interactivity inherent in geovisual analytics will allow me to get that full interactive exploratory picture of Panda diplomacy to test my hypothesis and also to see if other relationships exist. After I've used the tool to input my data, most important thing is how am I going to evaluate that it was actually successful? And through my research, soft power is notoriously difficult to measure, again, because it has such intangible resources attached to it. It's not quantitative by any stretch, it's very much so qualitative. So a lot of it will be a subjective assessment of how I see the tool as being successful with the data sets I provide. So the evaluation is going to come in two parts. The first part will be referencing the table to the right again. Basically, was the tool able to represent the data types I needed it to map as part of this table, the agent and the subject? If it's able to map, if it's able to represent, and I'm able to explore it, then that's a successful evaluation. If there is a tool that does not, or if there's a data type that does not fit a certain tool and is not able to be represented, well, then that's a limitation of the tool. The second half of it is evaluating how the interactivity and the exploration is successful. So this is from research by Amar and Stasko, where they developed 6 knowledge precepts inherent in visual representation, visual analytics, and using these, basically using these as a frame of reference. Are you able to accomplish multivariate explanation using this tool? Or for example, is this tool able to facilitate hypothesis testing? This is something I'll be doing based on my hypothesis that I presented before. There are limitations with this project in general. We did talk about a couple specific to the data types, but in general, this project, even though it's aimed to explore relationships within public diplomacy, this is not going to cover all possible relationships. The point is really to show and demonstrate that this exploration can occur, not to quantify all of the different types of relationships that geovisual analytics can discover for public diplomacy in general. There also will be some subjectivity in the results. As kind of discussed a little bit more in depth before with the evaluation, it is very heavily qualitative and not quantitative. So there will be some personal assessments of how the tool performs based on my data set and experience with it. I will be creating my own data sets, so there's always human error with that. There's also error with making sure that it's complete data sets, it's complete research, and that there might be typographical errors within it. And finally, there are limitations with the insights tool itself. It's, not all tools are perfect. It has its own strengths and weaknesses, so I'm also bounded by the limitations of that tool. But really, it boils down to, this is all well and good, but what is the significance of this project? What's really the point of it? And that comes twofold. One is to support public diplomacy, and one is to support and further study in geovisual analytics. So for public diplomacy, really the point of this project is to demonstrate that geography as a discipline can contribute to public diplomacy as a discipline through the use of geovisual analytics. Hopefully, introducing this example of using a geographic frame of reference has the potential to ignite further scholastic study by unveiling these previously explored insights. The second part of significance for this project is in geovisual analytics itself. Not only will this project provide a case study for evidence of the power and extent of geovisual analytics to explore the geospatial and the non-geospatial attributes of a subject, but it'll also highlight and show Esri's insights for ArcGIS as a geovisual analytics tool. It will inform others of the tool's capability, but this project will also present a tested method for which to explore public diplomacy indicators like panda diplomacy. And I'll get more into that with the future work that this can support. So first, it can definitely, I want it to continue panda diplomacy study through looking at China's Belt and Road Initiative and conservation science. If we think about this in regards to panda diplomacy, you know, with the Belt and Road Initiative, are pandas all of a sudden going to pop up in the countries that have agreed to be a part of this initiative? Are pandas going to be taken away from countries that don't agree to be a part of the trade agreement? Or conservation science? Will China use this as an excuse to extend their public diplomacy efforts further and pass more pandas off to more countries under the guise of conservation? Or on the other side of it, will the general public be adverse to giant pandas continuing outside of their natural habitat, and then China will lose this public diplomacy indicator or this public diplomacy strategy as they have to pull all pandas back to their natural habitat? Hopefully this can also support other public diplomacy indicators. This is especially useful within national security to be able to take an innocuous object like a giant panda and make conclusions about a company's power strategies and their national defense strategies as well. So hopefully this can be used amongst other public diplomacy indicators like museums, schools, language institutes, even things, soft power attributes like entertainment industry, things like that. So to complete this project, it'll take from November until April. The deadline for April is my projected presentation venue at the USGIF GeoInt Symposium. I have not applied for it yet. Applications don't open up until November to December. The reason for choosing this venue is really because of that last point I discussed, which the implications of this project as far as using panda diplomacy as an indicator and the methods tested and utilized during this project could contribute to geospatial intelligence efforts for our own national security. So with that, I will end my presentation. I do have my references slide after this if anyone would like to look at anything, but I will open it up for questions. All right, I'm trying to figure out how to open up chat.
If you have any problems, just close down your stop sharing and then open up the chat. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I love that question. How do you treat the data when a gifted panda dies in your methodology? So for me, that's going to be not a removal. It won't show up as being there anymore. So that's the key point for including removal in one of those data types, that it has actually happened where in the United States, 2 new cubs were born in, I believe it was Washington, D.C. And this was a couple of days before President Obama was slated to meet with the leader of Tibet. And China did not want that meeting to occur. And after, even though it, President Obama went through it, met with them, China immediately removed the 2 pandas from United States custody. It was under the guise of, well, they're born, we want to care for them, we want to take them back to the natural habitat. but the proximity of these two events occurring close in time together, time and space really, is a relationship that I'd really like to explore using my methodology. I hope not. I really, truly hope that we don't lose our giant pin exhibits, but it is possible. Who knows? That was something that I wish that this project could have come out. I wish I could have been doing this project a year or two down the road when the Belt and Road Initiative was really underway, to really explore this exact point, that we're not part of that trade agreement. Is China going to be against that and take our pandas back? I don't know. That'd be an interesting form of retribution. Yeah, actually, okay, so the other countries that deploy and share animals as a form of soft power, this has actually been going on for centuries. During the medieval times, they actually Egypt gifted Europe a bunch of giraffes, and there was a huge giraffe craze for a while. A couple of years ago, I think it was the beginning of like 2011 or 2012, I forget which country it was, I think it was Turkmenistan, gave Vladimir Putin a puppy as a gift, as a sign of goodwill, essentially using that public diplomacy as well. There's also, Australia does it with platypuses, I don't know the plural, platypus, but also gives out those types of animals. Yeah, and Japan gave him an Akita. Man, Vladimir Putin has so many dogs. But there's a lot of use for this tool specifically with deploying and sharing animals as a form of soft power. Oh, okay. Well, so you bring up a good point too about soft power and public diplomacy in general, that it's not necessarily imposed by the government. For instance, let's think about Hollywood. The government doesn't run Hollywood. It is a form of soft power and public diplomacy, however. We think about countries that look favorably on the United States because of what they see in movies, or countries that don't look so favorably on the United States because of movies. This is not employed by the government, but it is used to the government's advantage. We can also think about this in the perspective of South Korea's K-pop. That would also be a form of public diplomacy as well.
Any other last questions? I think that's it for questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
To seeing your final results.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Peter. If you can load your presentation. Great. I can't hear you, Peter. Have you got your microphone on?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Great. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and start.
Okay, so I want to also give everybody a heads up that I've got a cold and potential laryngitis. So I was talking to my advisor, Dr. James O'Brien, yesterday, and I started squeaking. So we had to hang up, but I think I'm better. I got a big glass of lemonade here, so should be good. My project, and good evening, folks. Appreciate you being here to listen to my project. My project is about visualizing New York City subway turnstile data. And I kind of got into this, let's see here, kind of got into this topic in a roundabout way. My background is actually aerospace engineering, and kind of got into the software engineering world over time, doing a lot of design work in between. So always had computers in my background, and you know, so it kind of bled from test equipment to CAD design to database administration. And then the internet hit, and I started doing some GUI stuff, GUI development, web development. And so just kind of caught my interest at a later part of my career. But I actually right now do some Python software testing for Boeing, which is where I work. So I was trying to find a project, and it just seemed logical for me to kind of go down the Python route. And Dr. Brian O'Brien was teaching the Python class, and so I kind of locked into looking for something along those lines. And trying to figure out what to do then was another question. And I happen to be a big tennis fan, and my wife runs a couple of tennis teams, and so we're pretty much tennis fanatics. But so we went to the U.S. Open, and when I went to the U.S. Open, I was kind of researching how to get around New York City, and there's all kinds of different ways to stay there and go to the big U.S. Open venue that happens every year. And I started learning about the subway system and how to get around, and how everybody's recommending that you stay in the city to get a taste of the Big Apple. And so that's kind of what where I started getting my idea for doing a project around this subject matter. So Python, tennis, and subways. And but what I want to kind of do is just talk a little bit about that a little bit more, and then talk about my objective for this project. Then go into the strategy, the methodology of how I'm going to go about this. And it's going to be a pretty big task, I think. But and then what I'm anticipating to get out of it, and talk about the timeline and where I'm planning to present at, and then some references. So this is New York City. I'm going to go through some of these slides quite quickly here. This is the big show. U.S. Open happens every year in August and September. This year, this is the Arthur Ashe Stadium. So this is where the finals are normally held, and here we have the champions for this year. A newbie beat the old state champion, Serena Williams, and then we have Nadal, who's also you probably all heard of him, just through the news. So the Billie Jean King Tennis Center sits at the end of one of the subway train lines, and to get to Times Square, there's only one way to go with the subway, and that's through subway train number 7. And so it's kind of if you want to go to New York and do the tennis thing, but then also get a taste of the Big Apple, you kind of want to stay downtown, and Times Square is kind of where it's at. It's really, if you haven't been, it's amazing. I mean, I'm a country type of person, but always kind of weary about all the crowds. But being there, I get I love New York, because it's just amazing place. And this is where we stayed, and it's if you're going to stay downtown, I'm doing a PR for this hotel, because it's kind of like you're in the middle of tons of people, and then you walk into the hotel, and it's like a throwback to the 1930s, 1940s. They're all dressed like that. It's very very pristine. So But to get to the subway, all you have to do is step out your door and a block here, a block there, and you're at a subway station. And so makes it pretty convenient to get around with subways. I mean, you can go other ways. You got taxis and Uber and all that, but we chose to take the subway, and had to learn a little bit about it. To do that, there's a couple resources out there. One is the Weekender. This is kind of like the go-to resource for anything whenever a subway train breaks down or has delays or something like that. You're going to see it here if you can understand it. So it's pretty intense, a lot of data. And so some people choose to go with a alternate resource called Transit, and there's probably quite a few apps out there, but at the time, Transit was kind of the one that was being promoted. It kind of actually takes the Weekender data and fine tunes it to make it more understandable. My go-to was really the MTA to kind of, for tickets and that sort of thing. But started coming across a resource here where I was getting an idea for my project, which was a developer page that provided free data feeds for different things that you can do with the data that the subway system in New York generates on a minute by minute, hour by hour, week by week basis. So my draw was the turnstile data, and so what they do is they generate a weekly report on Saturdays, but the data is captured for the whole week. It's just that you don't see it till each Saturday, and it tracks the turnstile data where commuters are entering and exiting the train stations, and more or less records every single click, and then dumps it into this huge text file each week. So my thought was that to kind of utilize the data to kind of track when are the high and low periods of commuter flow in the subway system. And some studies have been done about this. And I'm really not sure how I got into getting this idea, other than maybe one of these case studies, the last one I'll show you, but as far as a data visualization. But this one here kind of actually uses the R programming language to do some tracking of data. And then there's a case study where, oops, that's some typo there, where there was a melding of different data sets that was done to kind of prove that you can take some, combine some of the information to maybe help answer some other questions. This one here actually used the Jupyter notebooks for some of its analysis, so I'll probably be drawing off it to get some ideas for Python coding and whatnot. And then this one here is the one that was done back in 2013, but you can actually run it, and it kind of proved to me that you can. Oops, I'll turn this down maybe. But it kind of showcases when the rush hour happens, when it's a good time to travel to subway stations, and at midnight or whatnot, you're going to see it quite sparse. So on to my objective. So what I chose to do is, this was a data visualization that you saw, but I was thinking that, maybe that data could be used more proactively. I mean, you've got that data, it's being generated. I took a look around. I didn't really see much in the way of how this data feed was, being used. And I might be doing more research on it to try and find something that might give me some more guidance. So yeah, so to design and build an interactive web app that converts raw turnstile data into a mobile app. And I don't design mobile apps or anything like that. I'm kind of relying on the technology that ArcGIS has provided, which I'll get into in a little bit, that Esri has provided, really. So the methodology. So general project tools, you know, I'm going to need your computer hardware. I was thinking about using GitHub as a resource for managing the project. We use something similar at work called GitLab, and it's more or less a place to encapsulate the data. But with GitHub, it looked like I could actually draw on resources in a public domain, which gives me an excuse to get onto GitHub and try things out, because people might just join in and help out if there's something out there for people to do, or you challenge somebody to do something. I'm not sure exactly how that works yet, but plan to get into that. I think I started an account, and I really haven't gotten too proactive with it yet. And then the information product description and the master input data list, they come from what Joseph was talking about earlier for the Thinking About GIS book. You know, just kind of guidelines on how to set up your project. And so planning on using that, planning on trying to do some UML for the app design. And then one recommendation that James, my advisor, recommended is maybe do this stuff in the cloud. Since the file itself is going to be pretty big, it might be, you know, instead of bogging down my computer, try to get it, you know, do some of the processing somewhere else. So 3 phases for my project. They're all pretty massive. Data acquisition, storage, data analysis, and data presentation. So each one of those phases is going to need system requirements. It's going to require prototyping and implementation. Get it set up for the next phase, that sort of thing. So again, this is the turnstile data. This is the latest and greatest, October 19th, where the data was put out there on the web. And some of the characteristics of this data, it's kind of buggy. You know, it does come in a standard 11 column, 11 attribute format, but there could be missing data. One of the machines might not be working, and so then you're kind of wondering, is the data there, or do I need to get rid of it? And so there's going to be some massaging of the data, and I need to be able to kind of figure out an error analysis type process to report on % accuracy of a certain data set, maybe. And I don't plan to do the whole data set. It's going to be massive if I did. And so thus I kind of picked subway train number 7 to kind of take care of, just minimizing the workload, hopefully. And this is actually what it looks like on the web, actually. So if you look up here, it's a huge scroll bar, small scroll bar there, but long way to go down. And even if you did it, I think the web, from my, last time I tried something like that, it kind of hung on me. So it won't even scroll down to get to the bottom, I don't think. So this is actually an import that I did. And I kind of just did a shape command to actually find out how many lines of code were in this file. And so 206,000. And yeah, and that's for the whole system. So I'll need to somehow pull this in and either move it into a database, which I haven't figured out which way I want to go with it, whether it needs to be a geodatabase, whether it needs to be a SQLite database, or do I do something within Pandas to kind of, which is one of the libraries for Python, to manipulate the data before I put it into a database. So still need to kind of work on that a little bit. And these are the 11 categories. And so I'm probably going to be interested in entries, date, time, and some of these other ones, they'll define where these where the locations are for the units within the station. So they're important too. So I kind of just want to stick with Python programming so I can stay focused. I mean, I know they do stuff in R, but I'm kind of wanting to simplify where I can, and it looks like Python, there's enough out there with Python that I can probably just not worry about it. If I have to do something, if I find something that helps me along in R or something like that, I might try it, but that's only last resort. And then the other thing I'm going to need to be thinking about is if I want to do something in a mobile app way, I'm probably going to need to be able to automate this process a little bit. So this is a little bit about what I talked about. And then actually, even with the reduced subway train number 7 data, I'm also going to reduce it just down to August, September timeframe within the data feeds. And this data goes back about 10 years, 9 years. So, and when I said, I said over 10 years, but it's actually about 9 years. That kind of allows me to use some of this data because it's not real time. And so I was looking into getting a Twitter account, and I started running into some snags there with getting approved as far as just justifying what I wanted to do with the data, that type of thing. And so I just didn't have time to pursue that. So, I mean, that could be a next step, but just to keep it focused, I'm going to use the data set from the MTA, and then the opportunity there is to utilize this data to do some machine learning analysis on some of the older data from August, September from previous years, and see if I can come up with some kind of neural network that kind of can do some predictions on what a typical day might be, no matter what day you put into the app, what time you put into the app. You can maybe get an approximation of what you might expect at a certain train station. So I'm planning on using regular expressions quite a bit for the cleaning of the data, just because trying to figure out a way to manipulate the data and get things out of the tables that I don't want. So that's one module. This is a Python module that would do that for me. The scikit learn is another module from Python that would allow me to do the neural network stuff. And then there's a couple other libraries out there where I'd be drawing off of. So that gets into presentation then. So if I ever get this data working the way I want it to, then I would feed it up to one of the Esri products, and you probably use the Esri itself as as far as the background mapping and that sort of thing. That's where I might get a little bit creative. But I guess get back up here. So, Esri story maps, I'd really kind of like to get all 3 of these under my belt, just working on some tutorials, that sort of thing, just to understand how to utilize each of these things to my advantage, and then figure out which way to go with presentation. And some of the considerations, I'm actually, the 1972, might be 1974 New York City subway map was kind of my inspiration, my drawing to this project. But you know, I guess there's some technology with Illustrator and Photoshop that if I'm doing some underlying background map work, trying to make it look, you know, aesthetically pleasing, that sort of thing, I'll probably be utilizing that. But there's also, within that, there's a plugin called ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Creative Cloud that allows you to, excuse me, that allows you to utilize the power of Adobe Illustrator, or utilize the power of ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Illustrator, and makes Adobe Illustrator a more powerful tool. The same thing with Adobe Photoshop. And then I kind of, back in the day when we had the cartography class, I really enjoyed that Helvetica movie. Really, when you go down into New York City, you know, Times Square, everything's Helvetica. You know, it's like you're breathing Helvetica. You know, in the movie they said that, and it's true. Operation Dashboard for ArcGIS, that's something that I wanted to explore as a possible display option, from the standpoint that I can probably utilize the any kind of error analysis I do. I can maybe showcase some charts that showcases the errors I have with each data feed that I'm analyzing. And then our App Studio for ArcGIS, another option there would be for the ArcGIS, our App Studio player, utilizing that maybe as at least as a, you know, to, instead of a mobile app, you know, potentially instead of a mobile app, use that. But if I can get the mobile app to go, I would too. I'll try. So yeah, so this is Helvetica, and I just took a few sample operation dashboards for map presentation, and then this one here is for metrics, showcasing what I could potentially do. And ArcGIS Studio. So anticipated results. So I was messing around with App Studio Player a little bit, and you know, trying to get Manhattan Island on there, and so still in the infancy stages of messing with this, but this would be the App Studio Player, which I can use off of my desktop to kind of figure out what I want to do as far as visual presentation. And then this one here kind of showcases the fact that you have within App Studio Player, you can have a background, you can bring in a data set, and then you can also configure your background map, you know, so it's kind of a layering thing here. So what I'm thinking of doing here is these little dots would grow in size if commuter flow increases for a certain data set for a certain time period, and decreases if, you know, if it's the middle of the night or something like that. And so some of these dots would, you know, grow and retract to kind of, and then somehow I'd need to be able to program that in to where it's continuously feeding, so that you can kind of get that visualization. And not necessarily in a video format, but for whatever time period an end user may type in as far as what time they want to see see what the crowds are looking like at a certain train station. So this is my first shot at, I did this in Adobe Illustrator, and more or less just kind of tried to recreate what that might look like. And you know, it's very basic right now, but kind of just showcases, you know, where you're at. Okay, we're, you know, zoom in a little bit, so have different levels of map scale, and then you know, the user can select which train station and select the date, time, and then he gets or she gets a feedback on what the data was looking like at that, what the data might look like at that time. And this one I used the balsamic tool and kind of try to build off of it a little bit more. You know, some of the menu options, and you know, it's similar to the previous one. And the bubbles on the right kind of showcase that, you know, the app needs to be downloaded. It's going to be for subway, train stations, and it's about crowd control. So summary, main obstacle, my main worry right now is, you know, wrangling this data on the MTA website, and definitely going to be just using subway train number 7 data. Really hadn't thought about making this a big cause type thing. I'd probably, if if it becomes successful and looks halfway decent, I might notify the MTA about, what has been done if they're interested. Otherwise, it's more or less just an effort to get on top of trying to mess with Python, with ArcGIS, and figuring out the tools that are out there right now to be able to do future stuff with App Studio and story maps and that sort of thing. So my timeline. Right now I'm taking a Geog 583 class, just the way the way the class is laid out. And so it's actually a good thing in the sense that it kind of challenges me to work on the project that I've got going right now with 596A. So they're kind of running in tandem right now, and I'll probably continue that through early December, focusing in on that, so it's a benefit. And then I'll probably, depending on how much I accomplish there, then I'll probably just make it into 3 phases where I'd focus in on phase 1, 2, and 3 in succession and knock this thing out. So the conference I picked the Snow Mountain Ranch workshop in Colorado next April. And, this is kind of just there was no real logic behind it other than the fact that one of my favorite maps, all 3 maps here hang in my makeshift basement office that I got. And the one that's circled there is the Grand Canyon map that Tom Patterson created back in 2006. And he kind of created a step-by-step, and back in the day when I was taking the Cardo class, I was kind of following that pretty close. And he's got the apps on the details in an Adobe Illustrator file on the National Park Service's website. So I was kind of going with that, and this is where it's going to be. And this, I can keep this up for a minute or so and let you read it. But this is going to be my potential abstract for the presentation, for submittal of the presentation. And these are my references, and there are actually quite a ton of them. But the only one thing I wanted to say was here with DataCamp, part of my strategy is to just kind of hammer through some of these tutorials that DataCamp does. I paid like $100 and something to get in on taking all these classes. You can pick what you want. There's tons more, but these are ones that potentially could help answer some of the issues that I might come across. And that's it. Any questions? Okay, so I see, do you see any potential use beyond tennis? Yeah, so one thing I did think about was the actual commuter themselves being able to access this app. And when I was trying to figure out, well, where could I apply this? And I mean, the tennis thing was what propelled me to do it, but I mean, it does have the potential. Maybe some municipalities, if we serve this up, created awareness. And I was thinking with tennis, I would try, with some of the tennis resources I have, maybe, see if I could get on the U.S. Open website, but that's a far-fetched dream. But the the potential for maybe townships or something like that utilizing it, if it does become effective, it might be opportunity to try and contact them. Did I run over, Justine?
You're fine. You're fine. We've
Okay.
run under and a little bit over, so tried to balance things out, but you're
Okay.
fine.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions? I know that we're getting to the end. We have one more talk, but any other last questions? I think people are getting a little bit overloaded. I do have a question with the turnstile data. How easy is it to use that data and the format and bringing it into the ArcGIS and Python and stuff?
Well, that's the big question, I guess. I mean, it's easy to pull it into pandas, and so that's one of the libraries that it kind of internalizes the data within the Panda data frame framework, and then I need to figure out a way to put it somewhere else, and that's one thing I still need to work on. But that's wherever I put it, I want to get it to where it won't freeze up the text file, since there is quite a massive amount there. And maybe the strategy too is just to see if there's a way to pull just partial data, and then it might be more manageable, to put into a geodatabase or something.
Thanks. Yeah, interesting. Okay, I'm curious. I'd like to look at some of that. I'll have to dig into that a little bit. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sounds like you have some challenges and learning things ahead of you, but it sounds like an interesting project.
Thank you, Justine.
So our final speaker, thanks everybody for holding on, and thanks Jasmine for hanging in there. If you can load your presentation. Oh, and can you stop sharing your screen, I think,
Oh, yeah.
Peter?
Yep.
Great.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Hello. Yes, we can. Thanks, Jasmine. You're the last one. Hang in there. We're rooting for you.
Thanks for being in here.
So whenever you're ready.
Okay. Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay. So, hello, my name is Jasmine Acuna. Thanks for hanging in here for the last presentation. I know some of you guys are on the East Coast and I'm here in California. My advisor is Greg Thomas, and I am here to present my capstone proposal on using GIS technologies to improve data communication in local government by improving access to authoritative data for emergency response. So let's see. Sorry. A little bit of gonna change that? Okay. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving my slides. Okay, so here's an agenda on my presentation. Well, I'll present to you background on local government and emergency management, why it's important to improve data access in my proposed solution. Then I'll touch upon my methodology on how I'll achieve my solution, including the data sources I'll use and an example of what prototype I'll develop. I'll further talk about the potential limitations that I may encounter, as well as expected outcomes and benefits. And I'll end with my projected timeline and touch upon where I plan to present my project. Are you guys seeing the next slide? Oh, here it is. Background. Okay, at this year's Esri conference, the theme of the conference talked about how GIS is an intelligence nervous system where information bridges across multiple organizations that can transform how we see, think, and act. So I related to this quote because I'm a GIS analyst for a mid-sized city in Northern California called Fairfield. My motivation for this project is fueled by the fact that I'm the only IT analyst that supports all things GIS for the various departments in the city. And I'm also familiar with each department's technological capabilities. So 2 weeks ago, Fairfield also had its share of power outages. If you've heard about, we had a large utility here in California where they were proposing to shut down power for up to 5 days. And our city in Fairfield was proposed to lose power, and we set up our emergency operations center. And paraphrasing what one of the fire chiefs said to me last week after working the EOC was that he said that I don't quite know GIS, but I know that I like it. And I want to be able to ensure that instead of city staff saying they just like GIS, that they can say, I understand how GIS works, and this is how I can personally use it. So when we think about local government, I like to think of it as an organization where many departments provide services to the community, be it ensuring that our roads are clear, streetlights are on, and we have clean water. And they want to make sure that the community is getting served to the best of our ability. So as part of our internal workflows, geospatial data has allowed cities like Fairfield to be able to view where city infrastructure is located and address any issues with their infrastructure through online GIS applications in their office or out in the field using their mobile devices. Additionally, within an emergency response and an emergency management context, local governments are tasked to reduce community risks through various emergency responses. This may be rapid response to a house fire, to ensuring that people are aware about a massive power shutdown in their city. An example that geospatial technology has been leveraged in emergency management would be a county online map where the community can access where the proposed power outages will occur and can toggle on and off pertinent data in an online map. Or when a cell phone user calls 911 for an emergency, the dispatcher immediately sees where that person is calling from because of the GPS coordinates that are found inside their cell phone. To give context of what affects local governments, here are some screenshots of websites and emergency alerts that address the California's proposed power shutoff event. We can see Napa County having a website on how to prepare for emergencies, and in the corner of their page, they're letting the community know what active emergency may be occurring. In the other screenshot, we have a list of various emergency alerts that are given to the community. So how is this process managed? There's a considerable body of literature and resources on how local governments can respond to various emergencies and disasters. GIS technologies can be applied at any of these steps in the emergency response lifecycle. And with preparedness, you can create a map showing the community, where the power will go out. And in a response, you'll have a map showing where the power has gone out. And why is this important? The issue is that there are gaps in communicating data. Recent local emergency events have proven that there is a need for up-to-date information. Sometimes it becomes evident during an emergency that they need specific key information that they did not have access to previously. And the challenges is that data sharing practices need to be improved so that local government workflows can provide optimum emergency management services. There may be organizational constraints that may provide for optimal data sharing, social issues, monetary, such as budgets, policy where there's a law that prevents data sharing, or just individual personnel issues. And for personnel issues, you might have two people doing the same thing, data replication, or there's a lack of transparency of what practices there are, or who knows where the information is located. Additionally, while federal organizations such as the Federal Emergency Management Agency or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration can provide data for emergency response, much of this data can be regional specific and thus not always address local needs. So what is affecting my agency is that there's a lack of clearly defined, authoritative, and quality geospatial data. We don't have electronic data standards. We don't have established QA/QC workflows. And with an upcoming coordinate system change, we don't have a clear workflow on how to address that when we get new data. So some of this local authoritative data that is important in emergency management is utility-specific data. I have the screenshot of the national pipeline mapping system where it shows locations of large underground transmission pipelines. These are your gas transmission pipelines, jet fuels, anything that local governments need to know. And in my literature review, I found this quote that kind of related to me, where they noted that the highest requester of utility data came from emergency managers. And for my organization, it reinforces how, like, within the emergency management lifecycle, that this kind of need isn't always conveyed to the other departments. Considering the challenges that affect local governments and local municipal authoritative data may not always be accessible, I propose to create a workable solution by developing a prototype to link geospatial information to previously inaccessible authoritative data using existing city resources. So what is this authoritative data? For this project, this is utility data. We need to know where utilities are located during emergencies. The city already has a robust enterprise GIS. We have water, sewer, storm, transportation, utility data, but as I noted earlier, we don't have data standards. And the concept of this authoritative data brings up whether this GIS data is survey level authoritative data, and it depends on how it's used. In the scope of my proposal, I want to ensure access to this authoritative data so that they can provide survey level information about utilities. Currently, this data is hard to find, and not people outside of certain departments know that this data exists and that it can complement emergency management processes. And this is survey level plans with utilities, such as engineering drawings signed off by a city engineer. These are subdivision plans, capital improvement projects, and these scanned files are official authoritative historical records of city infrastructure that may not have been completely transferred into a GIS. For example, the spatial information may be in the GIS system, but key attribute information about the infrastructure may only be found in the plans, or some of the plans were drawn prior to digital drawing systems. As the engineers have noted to me, if there's doubt about information in our GIS, They want map viewers. Map viewers are supposed to use their public works authoritative data, but not everybody knows or is aware of this caveat. And a lot of this data is housed in file folders in our computers, named accordingly by project ID and a project name, and they're PDF copies of plans. Additionally, our IT department has conducted previous GIS assessments that have not resulted in new processes outside of our IT. So while these assessments were nice to read, there hasn't been much headway in data access workflow improvements. For example, this document may reference best practices to create geospatial data, but the city lacks resources to do so at the individual department level. So with current technology and data resources, this online map that you see here is an example of how I provide internal department data access. It's a basic web map with multiple layers and customized map tools. And having this online application has resulted in a reduction in printed map products, and there are more people who access this data than previously. But does this electronic availability of data remove the need for paper maps? In my opinion, paper or its paper equivalent, such as scan files, is just as useful if there are implementation challenges for having a full and robust GIS. In my research, I found that there are alternative ways to provision non-geospatial data authoritatively, such as the scanned documents, without having to digitize or go out in the field with survey tools. Similar studies have been made on developing these geospatial products that link non-spatial files and maps in historical and architectural fields, where organizations can apply geospatial point location to these documents. Also, agencies such as the LA City Airport, San Mateo County in California have existing web-based applications that do the same thing. And Esri also has a template regarding linking files in similar manners. So here's an example of how non-geospatial files can be linked to a location. Here is a national flood hazard layer viewer. If you can see the purple dots, these are the areas where people have that are residing or near flood zones and have determination letters that note that they are out of the flood zone. Sometimes these people who live here, they have built up and built their houses higher. And this attribute information on this layer then links to an official FEMA layer that was mailed out in the past and is now digitally available. So if you see here, there says download letter here. This is the letter that is related to this point saying that they are out of the flood zone. And this data is also managed within our city, and we have city staff maintain a catalog of all of these letters. So when we found this online layer, the person in charge of this project, they were really excited about there being a digital version. So I wanted to create something similar on our end. So how did I get there? To meet my goals, I proposed a series of tasks to develop my project as a result of the current constraints that affect my agency. The initial task is to conduct literature review regarding these organization issues that affect local government. You know, I want to find out what are the effective data sharing practices? How does that affect data sharing within an emergency management context? Much of this effort has been done underway as a result of the proposal, and the recommendations and findings from these studies will be utilized on how I want to proceed with the project. The next phase of my project would be to identify the current capabilities and constraints that affect my agency. You know, I want to find out what the authoritative data is, who are the key personnel. Currently, our city utilizes Esri citywide on an enterprise level. You know, our geospatial data has been successfully integrated with third-party applications, and it's within a SQL enterprise database. Additionally, I'll be working with city staff on developing a data needs assessment through surveys and one-on-one stakeholders, which in turn, I hope that with the meetings and the surveys, that it's going to sort of teach the users and reinforce the importance of authoritative data sharing. I've already established an initial inventory of the data sources, which I'll be using for the project. These are the city municipal files of our projects and subdivisions. These are PDF files. And luckily for me, they have set naming conventions that I can use and link to existing enterprise utility GIS data. And once I've gathered all my base project data, I will use this information to develop and test a prototype application to share the data. I'll be using existing available technology that is within my organization, and with the project data housed in the folders, I'll utilize just the basic Python script to read the files and create a new table. This table will be used to link to existing data. I then plan to follow up with the stakeholders to identify additional data needs after the data table creation process. So I'm going to show them, this is what I have. Is there anything missing? And next, I'll plan to develop the prototype for linking this data to geospatially, and then present the initial prototype. Here in this slide, I was able to use the Balsamic tool that we learned from our systems analysis and design course to create an initial prototype of like a file viewer application. Extending what we've learned about prototypes for system design, I plan to use the proven established workflows from previous studies to present this prototype, and then I'll utilize the user feedback to further develop it on an editor and a data viewer level. As I've said before, we already have Esri and we have an enterprise agreement, so I'm allowed to access and use the current technology, such as Web App Builder and the GIS Server enterprise technology. And during this process, I'll explore whether the applications would be leveraged through Portal or ArcGIS Online. I haven't quite figured it out yet. Right now, our city uses a lot of ArcGIS Online resources, but we also have Portal available to us. And another option is to use open source as a possible prototype, because it could be leveraged by organizations that do not have the Esri technology. And once I develop the prototypes, I'll provide it to the select users for testing and then make changes as needed with the goal of application implementation and adoption by the city. So the potential limitations of this project would be network connection issues. And so I want to make sure that I have to consult with city IT staff and our network team to make sure that data can be linked across different servers. Other potential limitations would be the data access not being allowed across the departments through policy or technical constraints. And my mitigation would be to prevent an initial proof of concept to management and also present it to our city attorney for review and approval. Another limitation could be the organization's reluctance to change. So as we've learned in some of our other courses, I really want to just garner that management level support in the beginning. I've already garnered the support within our IT division with our CIO, and my next steps are to work with the Public Works Department. Another potential limitation would be personnel issues, such as retirements or those who you were working with in my project that would leave. And so I want to build this redundancy. I just want to make sure that and ensure the organization's continuity for this project, that if somebody leaves, there will be a backup that I can work with. The expected outcomes and benefits of this project would be that with the increased interdepartmental awareness of the data and responsibilities, it's going to foster this organization change to improve data access. where there would be efficient workflows, which would then result in an improvement in emergency response and also improve data governance. So if one personally obtains validation from somebody else, I feel that the data is important. I feel that that person has an incentive to continue that data quality. And I hope that in the future, it would reinforce the need for implementing some sort of electronic data standards. Additionally, one of the value-added benefits to linking to just files is that in the long run, it can occur less cost to alternatives such as digitizing data, especially if an agency doesn't have the budget at the time to do such process. So here's my timeline. In this timeline, I note here, with the bulk of my prototype development is going to occur during the spring and summer, and I hope to present my results in the fall. Possible venues could be the Esri User Conference in July, but most likely I'll have the opportunity to present my results at my local county regional GIS consortium. We have a fall professional GIS event, and it consists of GIS-centric presentations geared towards the government sector. And with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you. And I have my resources in the next slide, so when it's posted available, you guys can take a look at it as well. That's it.
Any questions?
It says, will I be able to use cases or examples to convince stakeholders of the advantages of authoritative data sharing? Yeah, I'll be using that in my presentations to reinforce, you know, here's a proven method and the importance of using it. We've had quite a few emergencies that they're starting to realize that there's some gaps in the data, and I'm only one person, so. Yes, I hope to obtain user feedback throughout the process. As I'm within the IT department, and as an analyst, I've gone through a few projects where we, you know, new applications didn't get user feedback, and through some of our previous courses with you know, such as our project management class, I have a better understanding, and so user feedback is a continuous process that I will be fielding from the users. And then from there, if there's any sort of major changes, I'll present that to sort of at the management level to ensure that there's a common need. You know, I don't want to just, if it's make a change just for one person, I want to ensure that this is a benefit to everybody in the city. Do I use various technologies? Yes, we use Collector. We haven't used Operations Dashboard lately. It's something that I'm still like reviewing. It is an option that I could present the data as a dashboard to the users.
any other questions? I think that might be it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jasmine.
Thanks.
And we look forward to seeing your final results and how the different pieces go forward with your within your work environment thing. And on that note, that's it for this evening. Thank you very much. We have one more set of peer reviews tomorrow. So we will see you tomorrow at, hold on, let me double check the time, 11:30 tomorrow. So for that, great job everybody, and good night.